These are the feathers of a black francolin. It's called francolin.
What kind of bird is that?
It's like a grouse.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it was eaten by a fox. So I collected the feathers.
From a trip to Norway earlier this year, I have whole wings of gulls that I found. I don't know what was eating them. I mean, bigger birds, I guess. But they would just always leave the wing. So every now and then you would come across a completely intact wing. So now I have them in my room here, actually, because there's something beautiful about, the whole kind of set of feathers expressed together almost, kind of.
Yeah, I collect feathers and wings as well, yeah.
You must, yeah.
I saw on your consulate page yesterday that you had run a workshop in Erbil about the dangers of illegal migration, which is an issue the government here has been trying to tackle it. And I know what's happening on the other side in Europe. How big of an issue is that?
Well, it's an issue that's important to the UK. It's also important to me personally because, one of the great benefits of doing a job like this in person is that you're seeing the people all the time. And, this issue that's happening is young people from this region are being deceived ultimately, and they're being sold a version of the truth about the journey across Europe to the UK, to France, and about what happens when they reach there. It's not true, and it's dangerous, and it costs them a lot of money. So it's money that's leaving this region, which is in part one of the reasons that I think the government is quite interested, but also they want to look after their people quite rightly. So this is this project that I went to see last week alongside the French Consul General, Jan, because it's a joint project, although UK funded, is about trying to educate educators ultimately, and then there'll be another phase in the early part of next year where we'll talk to religious leaders as well, just to try and counter some of the disinformation that these we think they're criminal gangs. Ultimately, they're advertising their services and sort of selling a fake narrative. We want to counter that with some truths so that people, if they take a decision to do this, they at least take it in full knowledge of how dangerous it is, how uncertain it is, and about what happens if you reach the UK and you've come in through these irregular, illegal means. It's not an easy life. Yeah. It's not the life that people often sell. I mean, you're a well-traveled man yourself. You sort of maybe have experienced yourself how difficult it can be. And I know certainly that some of the Kurds that end up in Britain, they end up in quite marginal places in society, working for criminals, often people who are connected to the criminals that have brought them in. It's not a life that I would wish for my children, certainly.
So the difficulty is not only during the journey, it continues even once they have arrived.
Absolutely. I mean, the journey itself is fraught with risk, and sadly too many people have died making these attempts. And sometimes people die by drowning, but actually one of the things I find interesting is that you find people die because they have a heart attack, for instance, because that's how stressful and dangerous it feels at the time. But yeah, of course, once you get to Britain, it's not like you can immediately, you're not being given a passport and a job straight away. There's no free money. It's not an easy life, essentially. And what we find is that people end up doing very low paid jobs, unofficially, doing work that they wouldn't want to have been doing here necessarily, and that they can really be exploited by, sadly my country is not free of criminals itself, so you leave yourself being open to exploitation there as well. It's quite a dangerous and uncertain and unhappy life, I think, that we see people leading, and that's why actually we find that people voluntarily sometimes want to come back here.
Yeah, I've seen, and some years ago there were programs to reintegrate these people into the society here.
Of course, and that's something that the UK does as well. Of course, if people choose to come back, or if they're forced to come back, they get a package that we run through implementers here to kind of help their reintegration, because it's not easy, and particularly if you've because it's a societal thing here as well. If you've kind of invested so much of your money and so much of your hopes into doing this, to kind of come back and to have to start again, it's difficult. We recognize that.
And the problem is, the sad thing is that often people sell everything they have here, their house, their car, their property. They go and come back and have to start from scratch, basically.
Yeah, and that's one of the other angles of this is how can we as the UK help to create opportunities for people to try and invest that money instead in a small business, for instance. It saddens me a bit to think, if a lot of people go across and they end up working as laborers in car washes, for instance, small businesses like that. The question is, okay, how can we help people to start those kind of businesses here, and then they've invested their money in something that they own rather than in, an uncertain journey and an uncertain future.
Yeah, but there must be legal ways for people to go to the UK or any country for that matter, for skilled workers, for example, doctors, engineers. It's not that no one can get into the UK. There are legal means for people to go.
For sure. I mean, particularly for skilled workers, there are programs, there are needs that the UK would identify, and anyone's open to kind of prove that they're capable of helping out in that way. For unskilled workers, it is more difficult at the moment, just because there is there aren't as many gaps and needs in terms of the UK employment market. But of course, there are ways to get into Britain that are legal. And even for visitors, it's very open for people from the Kurdistan region, from Iraq, to be applying for visas, and they're treated in the same way as people from the rest of the world. It's an onerous process in some ways, in that there's a lot of demands from my system for documentation, which can be a bit jarring in this system here, but it's entirely possible.
So the UK consulate here does visa work, and
we actually don't. So our visas are processed through now Abu Dhabi. We're slightly unique in that respect, in that we don't have a kind of in-house processing ourselves. It's not done by the Foreign Ministry, it's done by the Home Ministry, and it's done these days. With some countries it's in-country, and with others there are sort of regional hubs where it happens. And for the Kurdistan region, it was Istanbul. It recently changed to Abu Dhabi, but of course we're not completely disconnected from that system in the consulate. So we try and make sure that where we think that visas are important, that we make sure that they're issued.
Nice. And there was one other thing I wanted to talk to you about, is that I saw a video of you at the Shanidar Cave.
Yes.
That was this summer, right?
I've been a few times.
A few times.
The video that you saw, yes, it would have been this summer. I had the great pleasure of visiting at the same time that the archaeological team were there.
Were they a British team?
They're an international team, but they're led by the University of Cambridge. It's a wonderful thing. I had the chance to be in the cave with them, but then I went down to the house in Shanidar village that they rent. And they live there, this kind of international group of archaeologists, led by this incredibly interesting British archaeologist and his French wife. They live like Kurds live in villages, on sleeping mats on the floor, cooking communally, eating communally, just doing the work for sort of a month a year, at least a month a year. Some years they come in twice. They're an inspiring group of people to be around, because they just love what they're doing so much.
Yeah.
And
archaeologists do love their work. That's why most people don't do it.
Yeah. I mean, I had the chance, I think this is in the video as well, to actually do some of the excavation myself. And it's, I did it for maybe 10 minutes. These guys are doing it all day, every day. And what you don't realize, actually, you think, as a naive person like me who doesn't know about it, that actually the work is in the dig, but a lot of the work is in everything that they dig. They bag up, and then they take it down to the village and they process it. They sift through everything. So actually,
even
a lot
the
of
soil, you mean?
But what they're doing is they're looking for the old bits of carbon wood there, little bits of bone. You know, it's the big kind of discoveries that make the headlines. The big discoveries, you know, like the kind of ancient Neanderthal human beings.
Yeah, they found, they named her Z, Kurdistan Z or something.
Yeah,
One of the oldest women. It's
exactly.
like Ethiopia's Lucy. Was she from Ethiopia or Kenya?
I keep on telling them they need a better name, to be honest. But yeah, no, a lot of what they're doing now is about working about how, whether kind of Neanderthals and Homo sapiens kind of maybe coexisted at the time, working out that, you know, it's a multidisciplinary team that's there now. It's people that are good at using techniques to find out about the climate record, for instance. So there's so much that you can learn in that cave and in the other sites around here, around the Kurdistan region. But Shanidar is somewhere that's quite dear to my heart, actually. The first time I visited was a year ago, actually. It was almost a year to the day. So it was winter, and I was mainly visiting Barzan and visiting some of the memorials there, for instance. And as always happens, I talk to people too much. And so my program became quite delayed, and my team was sort of said, "Oh, do you still want to go to Shanidar? You know, the sun's setting. We've got a long drive back to Erbil." I said, "No, I must go there. I really, I've dreamed of going to this place for a really long time." And I had the pleasure of being there as the sun was setting kind of on the mountain ridge opposite it. And you could really think your way, but if you sit down, you can't see the small buildings that have been built, and you can almost think your way back to what it was like to be a Neanderthal there kind of 40 or 50,000 years ago. There's nothing that you can see that they wouldn't have been able to see there then. And there were small flocks of deer roaming in the mountainside to the side of me. Wow. And there's a romantic part of me, and it was definitely engaged by that. It was one of the, when people ask me what I think about the places I've been to here, it's actually sometimes the kind of visceral feeling of moments that I'm taken back to, and that's one of them for sure.
Exactly, because you sit in a place where people thousands of years ago sat on a rock.
Yeah.
The same spot and everything. I mean, if you stay still for a few minutes, you would be transported back to then.
Yeah. One of my geeky hobbies is to go to caves around the world that have a long history of human habitation. So I've been to a few this year in Indonesia and in Norway as well, often with cave art, because that's how you know. But there's something more than just looking at what you can physically see in front of you, is that feeling that you get when you're sat where you know that there is people that have been there for tens of thousands of years.
Yeah, and I often, like when I talk to friends, I say, if you want to show you have history, you don't need ancient palaces or carvings or anything. Often it's not visible.
No.
It's in people's personality, mentality, or sitting at the mouth of a cave, for example. That's also history. You don't need tangible things to show for.
It's in the land as well. I mean, I studied geography at university.
Wow.
And one of the things, I mean, that's a kind of multidisciplinary subject in and of itself. But one of the things that always really interested me is the interaction between humanity and landscape, and that kind of symbiosis almost. So maybe that's given me an insight that allows me to read it a little more easily than other people. But I think in some places you just feel it. You feel it in the air. You're breathing the same air. The water that's dripping down in these caves is the same water sources that people were drinking from all those years ago. So that's one of the other things I always try and do, is drink some of the water and try and keep that connection with our ancestors alive.
Yeah, that's true. Water streams, basically.
We were talking before we started recording about people losing that connection ultimately. And, the more that people become urban dwellers, the more that your senses kind of change and the more that your perspectives change. I think it's a really important thing to make sure that people are embracing that side of our species, that side of our life. And that's partly why I actually was really pleased to come up here to record this and to see what you've been building here. And I know that that's something that's dear to your heart as well, this kind of allowing people to embrace the connection. And we're a 20-minute drive from Erbil, something
Yeah.
like that, from the center of the city. And there are birds here. You've been telling me about eagles and owls.
Yeah, exactly. And the government here often tell people, going back to the issue of migration,
Yeah.
they want people to start with reconciling with the land. I mean, once you feel detached, you migrate or you leave. But if you hold back and know your own history, your own geography, it will change your mind to appreciate it more, to stay, to build and basically make a home here.
I think it's a really important point, and I think it's underplayed. I mean, I always talk, when I'm talking to the government here, when I'm talking to my own ministers back in the UK, the word that I use is hope, ultimately.
Yeah.
What people want to feel is that they have a real hope for their future here. And there are so many factors that play into that. They're economic, they're political, they're geopolitical. But actually some of it is, as you say, it's about a romantic connection. And if there's one thing that Kurds generally are, it's romantic about, you know, the homeland and about their connection to the history and the land. So I think it's an important thing to, you know, to actually keep alive this flame of kind of Kurdish belonging.
Yeah.
The people of this region as well, you know, the ancient civilizations that have been here, but also the land as part of culture.
Yeah. And because everything is about the, the land, what we've been through as Kurds,
Yeah.
wars and fighting and tragedies was just for this piece of land.
Yeah.
So it makes no sense to do all that and then trash it or leave it or degrade it.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, trashing it and degrading it is another thing we could talk about for a long time. I mean, that saddens me when I see that. That's another part of, I think, part of the education that's necessary. And people, I think, here for, you know, one looks at the way that, you know, Bedouin nomadic type, I don't want to say tribes, but kind of patterns of living were alive here with, you know, you moved your sheep up in summer and down in winter, or vice versa. No, that's the right way around. And this real respect for the land, and actually, you know, I remember I took my team for an away day last year, the end of last year. No, it was this year in Shaklawa. And one of the things that we ended up doing was we walked up to the cave, to the shrine there, but actually did a litter pick up and down and just tried to fill as many big bags of kind of plastic litter as we can do. And it's a small thing, but it's this stuff persists ultimately. And it challenges, and you know there are other problems that are less visual that we need to think about, like what's happening in the air and what's happening in the watercourses, and you know, if the land and the air is slowly being poisoned, it's actually quite insidious. This is a global problem, but it's not. You know, this area is not immune from that at all. But actually, there are small things that people can be doing, like respecting the land, taking home their own rubbish. I always love seeing. Whenever I'm on road trips here, one of the things I love seeing is you know, that people sell bundles of wood, and that's because people like to go into nature and they like to have tea and to make themselves some food, and that's a positive sign.
Yeah.
And of course, that's a renewable resource, and that's something, you know, that doesn't leave a scar that's a problem, unless, of course, you end up with forest fires, which is another issue.
Because of a pot of tea, sometimes they burn down the whole forest.
So people do need to be careful with that, but ultimately it's the other stuff that gets left behind. It's a pleasure to see that people are using footpaths, for instance, where they're being built, that they're still out in the land, but ultimately there's a respect that one has to pay to the earth itself.
That's true. And I say that we often blame major global industries for air pollution, for global warming, but on the ground level, it's our own responsibility, each people's responsibility not to do the damage.
Yeah.
Let's say the air is polluted by the major countries, but polluting the rivers and streams and forests and everything else is people's responsibility, really. We can't blame everything on the outside world, not only in Kurdistan, everywhere else.
Yeah, I mean, one of the jobs that I did before I became a diplomat, I used to work for the UK government in our energy and climate change department. And I was there on the ground when it was created, and in some respects it was quite an exciting time because we were bringing together all of the aspects that relate to climate change in one sort of department in the UK, and these things that had been dealt with in disparate places and hadn't really been brought into one strategy were brought together. So you did have to start thinking about, okay, so you set yourself a strategic goal, which is, okay, we want to get to this level of CO2 emissions, for instance, by a certain date. So we set ourselves the target of, I think it was 80% reductions by 2050. This was back in 2000, the sort of early 2010s, late 2008-9 that I was there, and you sort of say, well, okay, to get to that target, we need to think about what people are eating, the way they're heating their homes, the way that they're flying around the world, and you know, there's almost no bit of human existence that is left untouched by the idea of carbon emissions, for instance, and that's just one aspect of man's kind of interaction with environment. And the way that can kind of, you know, degrade the environment we're living in. But little changes at an individual level can make a really big difference. We've been talking about litter, but I'm always struck by the statistics on, for instance, the amount of climate change inducing gases that you emit if you're a beef eater versus if you're eating chicken versus eating vegetables.
Wow, makes a difference.
Beef in particular makes a huge difference, yeah. Yeah, I mean,
Fortunately, it's lamb here, not meat.
I know. Yeah. And the way that lamb is farmed here is a lot more sustainable than kind of intensive beef farming. Although, you know, I have friends who are farmers here who are bringing in cows, and you've got big dairy farms as well. And you know, the thing that I'm always really conscious of as well is that actually you have to work within people's existence. There's an element of, okay, what kind of subtle changes can I try and induce in people and some of that's just by educating, by saying, you know, do you know how harmful this thing actually is? Because people don't realize some of the small things that can be greatly harmful. But you can't get ahead of culture. You can't kind of force something on a society that doesn't want it or that's not ready for it, because that's when you meet resistance, and
they have to realize it themselves, at some point.
It doesn't end up working in that way,
And so speaking of education, one topic I would like to discuss is people historically have loved to go to the UK to study. British universities are famous, they are reputable. In Kurdistan as well, and Iraq, people have been going to the UK for decades. Is it still continuing? Do you get applications? Do you get a lot of interest from people that they want to study in the UK?
It's still a huge thing here, yeah. I mean, you'll know yourself that this is a society in which education is really, really respected, and which the value of a good education is, you know, it's not underplayed at all. It's one of the really, you know, one of the pleasurable things about doing my job, one of the things that makes it easier is the kind of long-standing connections between people from this region, people from the UK. And, you know, people often, it's an easy thing to say, but then when on a daily basis I meet people who tell me, oh, you know, I did my master's in Leicester, I did my master's in this university. And often it comes with another story, which is, and I met my husband there, or I met my wife there. So it becomes part of the story of kind of UK Kurdistan relations, and that continues for sure. And we try and facilitate that. We want people to still continue to go. So we run. There's something that we run globally called the Chevening Scheme, and it's kind of fully funded master's scholarships. Not every country in the world is kind of one that benefits from it, but the Iraq and the Kurdistan region have always been kind of recipients of that. It's massively subscribed because obviously it's a great opportunity. It comes not only fully funded in terms of the actual fees, but it comes with you know, funding to help you live your life in Britain, which can be quite expensive.
And I think I understand that they can take their families with them if the person is married, for example.
Yeah, that's
students.
it's still possible. It's a little more difficult than it used to be because of some changes in the visa system in the UK, but it's still possible. And that's part of the experience, because what we also look for is not just academic excellence. We want people that so it's quite an intensive process that we go through to select people. And actually, one of the things that we're looking for are leaders ultimately, and people that want to kind of really contribute. That they have to make a commitment to come back to this region.
I was going to ask: is there a requirement that they must come back?
It's not. We're not global policemen, so we don't enforce it. But there's an expectation, and actually, most people do come back. And
I know a few people that went and came back.
Yeah, and it's and to complete the thought, actually, I think because we're looking for people that have established themselves in some way and who want to contribute here, we want to make it as easy as possible for the right people to kind of contribute in the UK and come back. So that's why it's important that we know that we don't kind of separate families in that way.
And then there are, I'm sure everywhere in the world, but also in the Kurdistan region, you often see this British school, British university, British this, British that. How many of them are real, and how many of them have just put the name British in their sign, for example?
So the ones, I have to be careful here because I don't know about the ones I don't know about. But certainly we work closely with companies here that set up schools here. And, they're always keen to talk to me, and we're always keen to help them. But one of the things that is pretty clear with lots of them is that they do have kind of deep enough connections within the UK and to get the kind of accreditation that you need to give the UK qualifications, which is what should set apart one of these schools that sets itself out as being British. They will often offer international ones, and they'll offer, you could do the Iraqi system as well. But if they're offering things like GCSEs, IGCSEs and A-levels, then they will certainly have a sufficient connection with Britain that they've got themselves the accreditation to do that. It's not... you don't always find that they have, for instance, British teachers there, which would be a brilliant thing. But there are so many of those schools here that I think Britain would start running out of teachers if all the way around the world, everything that was a British school had British teachers in as well. And actually, it's part of an ecosystem that we're always interested in people getting into, because if what you're interested in is university education in the British system in the UK, then actually it's an advantage to you in some ways to have been through your earlier education in that system as well.
To have started here already.
Yeah. And one of the other things actually that, just on that subject, that I was pleased has happened during my time here is the opening of the British International University here, which, its unique selling point is that it does have those very, very deep connections into the UK, because it's in some ways in a partnership with the University of London. And it's actually one of the first places in the Middle East that is accredited to give a University of London degree.
Here.
So it takes me back to what you were saying before about this great history of people from this region, people from Iraq as a whole, going to the UK to get degrees and to get masters. And that's always going to be an option. But we want it to be easier. So this is a way that
education to your doorstep, basically.
Exactly. And they're doing some really interesting programs, like sort of medical foundation degrees that then lead you to studying medicine in the UK as sort of guaranteed entry. So you can start your journey here and do foundation year and then maybe 3 years of study, and then you might go and do your clinical study in the UK. And sort of become a UK qualified doctor after that point, and then hopefully come back here and be a doctor in this system.
Wow. And apart from that, I see a lot of businesses here started by people who were in the UK, and they restart what they used to do. UK pizza, let's say, even though it's a name in Erbil, but car washes, pizza, and some other things that they did there, and they have returned, but they still I like the idea that they still do it here, what they did there. Do you see those businesses and places here?
Yeah, I see them, and some places like UK Pizza, I have no idea what the connection is, to be honest. In fact, I've never eaten there, so maybe at some point I need to in order to educate myself. But yeah, it's the interesting thing is how much of this that we don't know about in some respects, and that to me is the system working ultimately. If people are kind of coming back and they're using money that they've earned elsewhere and they're saying, okay, well, I've got these skills and I've got this desire and I'll do this thing. And yeah, I might use some branding that's dear to my heart because of my own kind of personal history.
Yeah.
That must be a good thing, right?
Yeah, and people get nostalgic. Let's say British Kurds who once lived there, and here they would, for all time's sake, go to some of those eateries, let's say.
Yeah, I mean, that nostalgia must be a good thing, right?
Yeah.
Ultimately, it's good that they're here, but it's also good that their time in the UK touched on them in some way, that they feel like that's part of their own history, and through the kind of individual and personal histories, it becomes part of the history between two peoples. So long may that last, I think.
Yeah. So what else is the UK consulate doing here? Your consulates are usually, are they a smaller version of an embassy? Or they both do the same thing at different scale?
You know, it varies around the world. Most of our consulates around the world, our consulates general, would focus pretty squarely on two things: on consular matters, hence the name, and on commercial matters. So they would be a really strong kind of trade representation, and that would be the desire, because that's the kind of thing that in most countries you would do at the subnational level. But of course, the Kurdistan region is a bit different because the semi-autonomous region has its own vibrant political kind of history and system. So it actually feels and looks more, in terms of the functions that we do, it feels and looks more like something that could be an embassy in a small country. So, you know, I very closely track what's happening in the political system here, and actually because of the sort of unique and long-standing relationship between Kurdistan itself, the Kurdistan region, and the UK, it means that we end up kind of quite interested in lots of areas. One of the things that we're growing a lot at the moment is law enforcement cooperation, to try and kind of help the Kurdistan region tackle serious organized crime. That includes immigration crime for us. So there's a thread through what we've been talking about, but also we work across the defense sector, across a whole load of other sectors. So really, there's not a great deal that is untouched here. And the British Council are also here separately, and they have an interest in education, the English language, British culture.
The English language, yeah, that's a huge thing.
Yeah.
And then British English versus American English. It's an ongoing thing for new learners, basically.
Yes, I think in your path you followed the American English. So I don't know what spellings you use, and whether speaking to you don't have a strong American accent. So.
Yeah. And commercially, where does it stand? Like the UK companies, where do they stand here? Are there strong commercial ties, business ties, or is it just starting, or is it small scale?
So I think it's actually an interesting moment in that space. There are certainly really successful British companies here, and again, one of the things that that pleases me is actually sometimes I don't know about them. Or sometimes they come to me, you know, when they have a small problem that I can maybe help them fix, but they actually tell me, yeah, I've been here since 2019. I have this huge business, and that's great. I love to hear about that. And we have a lot of British companies here that sort of came in through Erbil, through the Kurdistan region, as their entry to the Iraq market. Because for a long time it was much easier to do business here. It was much safer and more secure, and the environment was very conducive. You know, that's changing a bit because Iraq itself is particularly in the last couple of years, has felt more secure and has felt like somewhere where people can make investments. But there's still certainly interest in coming in here. I mean, the other factor, of course, is that it's been a difficult couple of years financially for the government here. So I think there were fewer large government projects than there might have been that international companies can be investing in, but certainly that activity remains. And particularly with, as you say, the kind of British Kurds and their influence in Britain itself, I still find that there are lots of people who express an interest in investing here and in working with businesses here and working with the government here.
What are the types of businesses, if you know, like a couple, in which areas do British companies want to invest here? Yeah, we know some countries invest in agriculture, development of the agricultural sector, but the world is generally moving towards AI, software, that kind of thing.
It is. I mean, Britain is a services economy. Britain's economy has a great deal of number of things, but actually, if you look at the great success of Britain in the last 20 or 30 years, it's been in financial services, kind of consultancy, advisory. So you see all of those companies who try to be active here. The other sectors where I meet lots of British businessmen, oil and gas, of course, power generation, education, which we've talked about. And then we find, in the kind of quality goods market, so food. I'm often served British whiskey when I go and meet when I go and meet people here. I see British cars on the streets. But of course, Britain is an economy that looks forwards, and so there's a lot of investment in technology, investment in AI that's happening at the moment. I would expect that would filter through to here as well in due course. I think it's early days on that at the moment. It doesn't feel necessarily like it's early days, given the massive, rapid acceleration of how you and I are probably using it in our daily life in a way that we weren't a year ago and that might have been unthinkable 3 years ago.
Yeah. And then England or Britain has a long history of banking.
Yes.
Kurdistan has almost zero history in banking, but the government now has been trying for a few years to develop the banking sector, to involve people and all that. Have you done anything, the consulate, the British government or British banks, to get involved in that sector at all?
So, I mean, one of the things that we've been helping with, historically in the time that we've been here, so I'm talking over many years, is actually a number of sectors that touch on that. So digitization, we work quite closely with, the information departments here, and also with the Centre on reforms, more recently on kind of tax and financial regulation, transparency. But in our history, it was a bit more broad, and there were also UK consultancies that were helping with those kind of things. And those are the kind of activities that actually set a necessary foundation and a ground level for the banking system to thrive and for international banks to kind of come in. And it's always one of the things that strikes me when I come back into the Kurdistan region from being overseas is suddenly I'm in a cash dominant economy again. Yeah. Whereas when I'm overseas, it's just I'm paying with my phone for things, and the financial system in other places is really making it easy for people to live their daily life without some of the frictions and some of the costs that you see here. Yeah. And that's why I think initiatives like My Account and things related to that to get people a bank account and to get them using it, and to sort of to make it more possible more broadly for people to be using banking and having electronic payments. It's kind of it's necessary almost, and for businesses, the way that the businesses function, that's really, really important. But of course, we speak to banks here, and they're very interested in having correspondent banking relationships with banks in the UK. So where they come to us, we'll always help them make those connections. That's one of the things that the consulate is here to do.
And when it comes to now, Kurdistan, I see, is opening up to, it has always been open, but people are opening up to Kurdistan, I must say,
Yeah.
from the outside world. When you watch YouTube, you have YouTubers, vloggers, everyone coming here. Do you see British people coming here not for any other purpose but tourism, or that's very little?
Certainly, I've seen that. Yeah, there were some travel writers that came through earlier this year. I mean, the Zagros Mountain Trail, for instance, won an award in the UK, Sustainable kind of Tourism Award recently. And part of the reason for that was that, you know, the PR people in Visit Kurdistan brought in a UK travel writer who kind of, you know, who comes and looks at places because they, because they're the future of tourism. And that doesn't tend to happen in a vacuum. That happens because people are already coming here. Now, we always have to look at our own travel advice. And at the moment for the Kurdistan region, it's not like federal Iraq where for much of the region we say don't come at all. At the moment, our advice is, you know, you have to judge that your business here is essential if you're coming. But of course, we're looking at that. And one of the things that's obvious when you spend time here is that, you know, the trajectory of the Kurdistan region in terms of security, in terms of development, it's very positive. You're in a difficult neighborhood. So there are some things that aren't within your control. But I can certainly see a world where, in the future, where the travel advice changes and where that really opens up a different kind of tourism. The kind of people that are probably coming through at the moment, they're quite intrepid and they're risk takers in some way. You know, they will come and they're on the ground. They might not feel like they're taking a risk, but little frictions like, can you get travel insurance? The question of what the travel advice is relevant in that space. But, you know, once in a future where the advice is different, you'll probably find that organized tourism and more kind of tour groups and things start coming through in the same way that they do in other parts of the world. And that's when it really takes off, I think.
And Kurdistan is attractive in two aspects for travelers. One is that they said, I went to Iraq. I often see that. So even if they go to Zakho, which is the most remote part of Iraq, they say, I'm in Iraq, which officially counts. And second, Kurdistan was isolated for so long, it's like an unseen place, an untouched place for some. Yeah. Otherwise, everywhere else has been seen. They have years of history of tourism. Yeah. For Kurdistan, for many of them, Kurdistan is just new, something new. Plus, it ticks off the Iraq bucket list.
It does. The thing I quite enjoy doing sometimes is, you know, there are people who understand the Kurds in Britain and who understand the Kurdistan region. Also, there are people that don't. And I remember there was a BBC film crew that came through a few years ago, but it was broadcast last year, and it was a nature documentary, and they filmed leopards, essentially. Yeah. But what they did in doing that is they filmed the environment and the mountains of Kurdistan, and there was a good section that was broadcast in Britain. I'm not sure it's broadcast internationally, and the sort of, you know, the making of type section.
Yeah, that helps.
And after it was broadcast in Britain, I got people contacting me sort of saying, wow, this is where you live.
Wow.
We understand it now. And I'll show people footage that, because I love to travel around the whole of the region. It's really important as part of my job that I'm not just sitting in an office in Erbil or just meeting political leaders in Sully and Erbil and other places. It's important to me to understand and to meet people everywhere and to feel the landscape in the way that we were talking about it before. So I often show people the things that I see, the things that it's my great privilege to go and see. And of course I have, you know, at the moment I have a bit of security that maybe some tourists that come through wouldn't have. But to see people's reactions to the landscape here, to the environment here, to, you know, to the idea of some of the canyons and some of the rivers and places like Roandus. And that's one of the great selling points here, I think. I think if I were trying to build tourism here myself in the future and trying to attract tourists like me, agritourism, walking routes, because that's the other great selling point of this region is the agricultural produce. I think there's a lot of potential here in future.
Yeah, we are surrounded by that lettuce field where you see the sheep grazing. That,
we drove through it on the way actually, and it
so
made me
that's
hungry.
Lettuce. And right here it's beet.
It's beet.
Yeah,
okay.
yeah. We could have dug some exactly. And I was in
sugar beet or it's,
sugar beet. Yeah.
Okay.
But it's eaten as just as beet basically for pickled and
of course
steamed.
Of course, yeah.
And then I was in Chermo village 2 days ago, which is the oldest one of the oldest agricultural sites in the world.
Okay.
So yeah, speaking of agrotourism and agricultural produce, we have 9,000 years of history of agriculture here in Kurdistan for people to see.
Yes, and that's the other thing that the current tourists who do come through are really interested in, is this ancient history that's kind of civilizations layered across the land here almost. But it's fascinating to hear things like I watched that video yesterday, I think the one that you broadcast, that you published on that village, and I'm always fascinated to learn about things like that.
Yeah.
Because one of the things that you realize when you spend time in here, and also I spend time in Nineveh and other places, is it's just how ancient it is. When my ancestors in Britain were living in caves, there were people here building irrigation systems, and it's a privilege to be here to kind of see that on the ground as well.
For me, actually, also I often see the history and life in Kurdistan in the last century through the books and the eyes of British travelers themselves.
Yeah.
I did a brief review, which went viral, about a book of photos by Wilfred Thesiger, who came in the late 1940s. And then he mentioned some of the famous or prominent Kurdish leaders who were not very prominent in the he just mentioned them by name. This guy was here, that guy was there, and then amazing photos and things. So I love those books.
One of the things that I did in preparation before I came out here was, because obviously Britain has quite a long history here, and some of the people that came before me, they used to call them sort of colonial officers back in the 1920s. But they lived a very different life to the kind of life that I lived here. They were very remote from Britain. They were, talked about Rwanda's earlier, and the building of the Hamilton Road is a really good example. People came and they lived in the village. They traveled from village to village. They met with tribes, and they have amazing stories to tell. And quite a few of them wrote those down or kept diaries and published them. Some of them I was able to get hold of through my office, and others are just published books that you can look at. And I really enjoyed reading those, in part because it's an insight into the region, in part because it's an insight into my own industry and how people have done it in the past. But also I like going back to them and looking at the index when I've met, a tribal leader here or been to a certain place, and sort of, and the same names, the same villages crop up. And it's it's interesting to see how they were perceived 100 years ago. It's interesting to see how little has changed sometimes.
There's one actually here called To Kurdistan and Mesopotamia in Disguise. Yeah. And that's by Major Eli Sohn. Is that how you say his name?
Yes.
So he comes here. What I like is that I'm from Halabja, and he sets out from London with the idea of going to Halabja. I love it. He says, I'm going to Halabja in 1908.
Wow.
And then he takes a ship to Istanbul, from there by land through Syria, Mosul, Tikrit, and he goes to Halabja. And then at some point I realized he has gone to my father's village.
Really?
Yeah, he talks about the village, the hill, the tree. And I told my brothers, I said, this is the tree in our village.
How
it's
magical.
amazing, about more than 100 years ago. It's there, and then I connected the dots. I said, that's our village.
Yeah. There is something, one of the things about this region is that there's a very modern side to it. I was recently in Dubai, and you come back to Erbil and you see a lot of the same things, and there's this real ambition and the same thing in Sully and other places when I'm there, and people look forward and they're open to AI, and they're, you know, the universities here are doing really innovative things, and you know, there's modernity, but also it's still possible to go and sit in a tribal diwan, and these kind of ways of living still persist, and structures still persist in a way that you know, keeps you in touch with your past.
Yeah.
And that's, you know, often provides a social structure that's helpful. It provides a kind of grounding, and it's one of the ways in which we can kind of continue this thread of connection with our past and our culture, and connection with the land that we were talking about as well. Oral history as well is something that's really interesting here, and the stories that you tell, that you hear people tell you when you go to these kind of environments. It's and it's the similar kind of stuff that you read in these kind of books.
That's true. And then there's
but is there any memory in your village of those kind of visits? Because that's one of the other things I'm always interested to hear about, is people's perceptions of what happened in the past.
Almost everyone know Major Zone in Halabja.
Of course.
It's in the culture now. So Major Zone, they don't know much. It's just the name.
It's just the name.
Haven't even read the book that I have. But he left because he spent a year in Halabja.
Yeah.
In the courtyard of the ruler of Halabja, which was Adila Khanum, a woman.
Yeah.
And then he says he was amazed by how this group of people, this family in Halabja in 1908, they were sitting on the rooftop in the summer and talking about English and French literature, in French and English. He said, how did they learn this language in this remote part of the world? And he spoke Kurdish so fluently, Major Zone, that he got along with everyone in Halabja.
Yeah, it's, look, I mean, I don't airbrush British history here. There are bad moments in the same way that there are very positive moments, but
as with everyone, with every power, but let's say.
But it's important, I think, that it helps me. It helps me in the business that I'm doing now, that I can walk into a village in Halabja. Maybe I should try and visit your village in that case.
Yeah.
And that there is this connection with Britain that spans back such a long time.
Yeah, and exactly. I mean, there's a lot of documents left, and I often think that there's one major difference, is that historically Kurds were oral storytellers.
Yeah.
And Brits are known for record keeping. Write down everything. For us, it was just tell everything.
Yes.
So we have some of our own stories written down by travelers and explorers, let's say.
Yeah, I mean, you have a legacy which I'm jealous of, is the use of poetry in your storytelling and in your kind of culture. You know, Britain is a place of poets as well, but it doesn't have quite the same centrality that it's traditionally had here.
Yeah, here in the Middle East, that's so true. And I remember my father's generation, and the one before him, mainly the one before him, my dad's great uncle, and before him, they would talk in poetry.
Really?
Yeah, they would meet and greet almost for 10 minutes. It's just back and forth, like a wrestling with poets. Yeah. How are you? How's your family? How's everything?
Yeah.
In poetry, made up on the spot, basically improvised, and all beautiful. Yeah. Later on, it turned into actual conversation. And I often say, as a journalist, I say, it doesn't help. What's the point? You get lost in the poetry. Yeah, you want clear sentences, clear lines.
No, I disagree with that completely. I mean, I agree in some ways, because, you know, brevity and clarity, if you're doing something like journalism, isn't so important. But, you know, there are tribes in Africa that, you know, poetry is a universal human facet. It's everywhere, and people don't realize this. There are tribes in Africa that say things like, you know, the only way that I can express the thing that I'm trying to express, it's not through song, it's not through stories, it's through a poem.
Yeah.
And I'm sure that you will have read poems as well, where it's so spare. There are so few words, but the sentiment that it brings through to you, it really touches you inside. It's like those moments I was talking about before, where you sit in landscape and you just feel something. And of course, a lot of song lyrics these days kind of have replaced poetry in some ways.
Yeah.
And that works in a slightly different way because you've got the music as well that kind of hits some emotional cues in you. But there's a magic to proper poetry. So I really hope that that remains part of your culture and that stays alive. I've met a few poets in my time while I've been here, and I think they perform an important task at the moment, but also they all seem to still think that it's a kind of living, it's a living part of your culture.
Yeah. And if you like poetry, actually, you like all poetry. I know people who hate new poetry, modern poetry, they like classic, but for me, even if it was written yesterday, often I like it because I don't look at the poet's age or anything. It's just what they write.
I often think that for people who think that they don't like poetry, it's a bit like, Shakespeare is something that's quite important in British culture, English culture. And there's a real difference between people who've only ever tried to read it and people who've heard it or seen it performed. And actually, it's hearing it spoken out loud. Yeah. And that's when the rhythm and the timbre of it and it just begins to make a bit more sense. And you don't have to understand the kind of old English forms of the words to actually understand the meaning behind it. Mm. I think that's the same with poetry, is that, if you hear a live recitation, or if in this case that you were talking about, it's just literally part of your meeting and greeting ceremonies, then it makes more sense.
Mm. Let's talk about one. We will soon wrap it up, I hope. You are not cold, because I feel a cold breeze. Yeah,
I'm loving being outdoors, actually.
Yeah, it's good. And so let's talk about punctuality. Okay, because I know globally Germans are known to be very punctual, but among the Kurds is the British.
Is that true?
Yeah, they say it's an English appointment. Really? You are in the Middle East, which that's not often the case with people. Punctuality, respecting time.
Yeah.
What can you tell us about that?
I feel like I'm in danger of setting myself a standard that I'll then have to meet.
You don't have to exactly specify anyone, but generally it's like, because when you come to this region, everything changes with sense of time and all that.
Look, I think, one of the things about being a diplomat is that you can't just live your own culture when you're somewhere else. It's the pleasure of it is actually that you're inserted into another culture and you understand it, and you understand things that are, if something happens, it's not rude, or if I do something, I'm being rude to someone. And it's sort of speaking a non-verbal language in that way. Mm. So, am I British and therefore I will try and turn up somewhere on time? Absolutely, yes. Within my own mission, will people say that I'm sometimes late by British standards? Yeah, the same is true. Yeah. But also, we don't read anything into it. If people from this region are just being Kurdish,
you will pick up some of that. Yeah, that's why they already tell you.
And there are other aspects, like things that I just, it's always raised, but it's because it's so true. The hospitality here is second to none. So it's not for nothing, I think, that I haven't actually heard that before, that kind of idiom about kind of an English meeting or that in terms of timing, because all I'm thinking about when I reach somewhere is the meeting starting on time. It's just I'm overwhelmed by the welcome and by the kind of these things that are very, very natural to people from this region.
Yeah, you could be there on time, but it never starts on time because there's tea and coffee and date and all that.
But that's part of it.
That's part of it. I love that. Time. Yeah. I love that. And then do diplomats, in this case do they choose their own posting? Did you choose Kurdistan or you were sent to Kurdistan?
Each country has its own system. In my own system, you apply for the jobs that you want to do. And I worked in Baghdad before. I worked in Baghdad from 2019 to 2021. And one of the things that happened in that period was COVID, and it became more difficult for staff to rotate in and out. And because the mission in Erbil is a lot leaner, it's more efficient, and the mission in Baghdad actually I came uncovered in that period because there was a gap. So I came up here for 2 or 3 weeks then. And I'd known from that point that I had to come back. I was lucky enough to then carry on visiting in the rest of my time while I was posted in Baghdad, and that meant that I traveled around the region as well. I traveled to Duhok and I went to other places, and I was just waiting for this job to come up essentially from that point on.
Wow.
This has been the one that I've always really wanted to do, and that's because it's because of the people here, it's because of the history here, it's because of the relationship, it's because it's really important to my government, to my people. I feel lucky every day that I go into work, and if you can say that about your job, not many people can.
Yeah.
So it's a blessing.
And how long is usually the term for a British diplomat in the world or in Kurdistan?
It really varies around the world because it depends on a number of factors. We have, in our system, we have things called speaker slots, for instance, where the office will invest in full-time language training for you. They might spend 2.5 years teaching you Mandarin, for instance, before you would go out to China. And in those posts, they all tend to be quite long because people want to really, really get completely fluent at the language once they've had that training, but also there's a kind of payback period on the investment. And then you get postings like Baghdad, for instance, where you're not allowed to take your family with you, and life is a little bit more oppressive, and those tend to be shorter postings. Erbil at the moment is one of the shorter ones. I'll be here by the time I leave. I'll have been here for 2 years, I think, and that at the moment is the cap. But that's definitely one of the things I think we need to look at, because the longer that you spend here, the more effective you are, the better relationships that you have. And, we talked before about the trajectory of the Kurdistan region, about the safety and security, about the kind of life that's possible here for Westerners to live. And I can see a future, I think, not too far away where it becomes a much more normal posting. People bring their families in. People want to stay for a really long time. If I could stay for longer, I would, for sure.
So, yeah, you are more than welcome to stay forever. And what's the next? Is there any major project going on with the British consulate doing it here, or British government, or any big plan for the next year?
I mean, the next year or so, I think what we'll continue to try and do, we'll work across all of the sectors that we work across. So sometimes it's dangerous to point things out because people think that that's the only thing that you're doing, but we definitely continue to deal. I think one of the big things, the big growth areas, as I was saying, that we've been working in is this kind of holistic plan of dealing with the issue of hope and migration. So through the next year, we'll continue to do what we've been doing, which is kind of trying to work across the spectrum. So I talked about law enforcement cooperation at one end, this program of kind of community engagement and education that we're trying to do. We're also trying to do kind of economic development, particularly in Rania, particularly in Raparin, where we've been working with the Deputy Prime Minister's office to try and start a sort of regional development agency, which would be this kind of this hub that can bring community and government and businesses together to try and enhance economic opportunities there. And I think we have hopes for its future, that it can do things like attract seed funding. It's very early days, but we're pretty clear that this is if you're looking at this issue writ large, it's not just about what can we do to stop people dying in small boats in the channel and putting themselves at great risk as they try to get across the sea. It's about all of the kind of factors that contribute to them having got to that place. And some of it is about criminals and the stories they tell and the freedom of movement and things that we can do to stop that. But another part of it is in how can we help the government here really invest in the futures of the people of this region, so that there's a very secure and long and bright future and that people can see that and that they can feel that.
Thank you so very much. It has been very enjoyable talking to you. And thank you for coming to our village for this conversation.
It's been a great pleasure. I want to see after we've wrapped a bit more of what you're doing in the land here, because I could happily spend a lot of time here. And
anytime.
I'm jealous of you getting to wake up amongst the eagles and the owls. And, I think the way you've set your life up is a really good example for others.
Life is too valuable, and you should spend it where you want to spend it.
Exactly.
Thank you so much again.
Thank you again.